All right, good evening, everyone. Like I said, there's lots of room up front. I don't think everybody in here smells that bad that you need to be that far apart, but maybe you do. You probably have been in Vegas for a few days, so maybe it doesn't surprise me. My name is Greg Kazanza. I'm a senior program manager on the VMM team. In the 2012 release, I worked on Zen server support. I worked closely with Citrix on getting Zen server added to the product, so we could support that as one of the hypervisors that we support. I also own bare metal deployment as a feature area, so I work very carefully to make sure that the very complex OS deployment process would try to be as smooth for all of you as possible. And then now, post-2012, networking is my main feature area that I'm in charge of. So just want to give you a little background. I'm up here with Alvin Morales. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you. My name is Alvin Morales, a support escalation engineer for Microsoft. I work with the VMM support products, also with virtualization, application virtualization. And I'm also one of the engineers that was in the TAP program. So any Connect feedback, replies, that was me answering those questions and providing answers.
All right, so some of you may have talked to Alvin. I know I've gotten some of your feedback indirectly through him, so thanks. So so today we're going to talk about advanced troubleshooting. This can be an interactive session, so if you have questions along the way, I actually don't mind if you interrupt me, and since it's a small crowd in here today, just if you delay me past the 1 hour mark, you're going to be late to the party this evening. So if you do come up and ask questions, please come up to the microphone and before you start talking. All right, so there are 3 areas that we're going to cover today in this troubleshooting session. First one is bare metal deployment. There are a lot of opportunities for failure during bare metal deployment. Once you get it working, then it works reliably, but along the way there are lots of things that you can discover can go wrong. So my goal here today, when talking about bare metal deployment, is to try and give you as many of those tips that you'll need to know in order to figure out where the problem is happening so that you can then focus on a narrower area of problems that may help you solve your problem a little bit faster. The next area that we're going to cover that Alvin will be talking about is agent communication. How many of you have seen agent not responding errors or have run into those in the past? I'm guessing a lot of you have. Hopefully this middle part of our session will help you to figure out why those happen and how to fix them. So maybe you can get to the bottom of those kinds of errors. And then finally, I'm going to talk about networking. Now, we didn't actually have a session devoted to networking in this year's MMS. So this is the closest that you're going to get to getting a networking overview this year. So along the way, I'm going to talk about some of the things you can do to help identify the problems when working with your network administrator to figure out why your network configuration isn't working the way it's supposed to. Does that sound good? Okay, so get started talking about bare metal deployment. All right, so bare metal deployment, there are a number of components involved in bare metal deployment. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in the process because there's a 0 to cloud to cluster. That'll show you how to set it up correctly, and that session is tomorrow. So I encourage you to go to that one to find out the details of how you would set up bare metal deployment from scratch. So it's a little bit out of order that we're doing these sessions this year. But the basics of it are you have a bare metal machine that you've just unboxed, you've set it up in your environment, and that bare metal machine, on it has what's called a baseboard management controller. This is the part of the server that lets us control the power and turn it on and off without actually being in the server room, because many of these are off in a data center somewhere. They could be miles away, and you're trying to do these deployments. You can't actually be there to turn it on and off. So you need a device called the BMC. One other thing that does for us is it lets us discover the computer and to understand that it's there. And so the very first step before you even get to the actual new VM host job is discovery. So you'll do that. That actually happens as one of the steps in the new host wizard or the add resources wizard. When you go through that wizard, one of the first few steps is discovering that the computer's there. And when you do that, you're actually going to talk to the BMC for the first time. So if you're going to have a problem communicating with the BMC, you'll discover it there. Later on, you're probably not going to have the problem when it's time to reboot the machine because you've already verified that it works. And the first thing we do when we kick off the job is we do the out-of-band reboot. So I'm actually going to jump right into a script and show you a little bit about what can happen when your discovery fails. So let me switch over. Okay, so here we have a VMM server. It's got a variety of hardware in it already. And the first thing I'm going to do is, before I start this up, okay. First thing I'm going to do, so I'm going to do a discovery. Now, how many of you have actually tried bare metal deployment before? A few of you so far, okay. The first thing you do when you do the discovery is you have to have a set of credentials. That's your run as account. Now, when you do the discovery through our UI, when you do a range of addresses, it's generally expected that many of the addresses within that range will not actually have a computer there that exists. And so we don't actually return a result in our UI for those machines that either aren't found or or don't match the credentials or return an error code. We only return the ones that are successful. If you actually do want to get detailed information about why a specific computer that you're trying to discover isn't actually there, then your best bet is to actually jump into PowerShell. And I'm going to be using PowerShell a fair amount today, so hopefully none of you are afraid of that. If you are, then you might want to go to another session. But I'm going to start off by getting my run as account. So I'm going to get the run as account. I'm going to do the find SC computer. So this is basically the discovery command that gets run in the UI. And as you can see, it just ran, didn't find anything, returned right away. Didn't return any errors. It just didn't find anything as far as it's concerned. Now, if you want to find out the actual results of every address in that range, you can add the -all parameter to that query. And when you do that, it's actually going to go and return the results and tell you a little more information. Out-of-band management failure, IPMI 0x9. This right here is the IPMI return code. You could actually go download the PDF from Intel on the IPMI protocol and look up this error code if you want to do it the hard way. If you're good at Bing or the search engine of your choice, you can actually probably find this error code with one query. The other option is to do a single address query from VMM. So you do the find SC computer again. This time you give it just a single address rather than a range. And when we do that, we will go out, do the query. In that case, we actually translate the error into a meaningful message. So we generally did that because when you're actually searching for a specific computer, then we assume you actually want to get the full level of detail back about why that query didn't work. In this case, it complained about an invalid role. Right here is the reason why this failed. So, when I see that, then I immediately think, oh, I need to look at my credentials. Turns out I'm using the wrong run as account for that query. So I switch run as accounts and then do that query again this time. It'll come up with the right information. So those are kind of the steps you would go through to kind of needle down where the problem is and how to get more information as you dig in. If you do the query, you do it through the UI, you do the discovery, and it doesn't find anything, and you know exactly which machine you're going after, you can go straight to this in the PowerShell and do the single address query. You don't need to do the other steps first. The other place where this would be useful is if you're not using bare metal deployment, you're trying to use our power optimization feature. That also talks to the BMC. It requires a BMC. Not to turn the computer off, because we can do that through the OS, but to turn it back on again. And there was a joke that power optimization actually stood for power off, because we had a bug earlier in the product where, in the beta period, where we would only turn the machines off and not turn them back on. But if you do run into problems with power optimization, you would actually go through these same steps for verifying that your BMC is being talked to correctly. All right, so let's jump back into my slides. We'll move on. So yeah, if you just run the new SCVM host job directly without going through our wizard, then the first step would be the out-of-band reboot. doing this reboot, we talk to the BMC. In theory, it's already worked because you did discovery off it. But if not, you can go through these same steps I just showed you. Now, when we do the out-of-band reboot, we expect that the machine is already set up to PXE boot. That's one of the prerequisites for OSD. That's probably your next opportunity for failure, is when you do the PXE boot, the machine doesn't have a network adapter set to PXE boot, or you have the wrong adapter set to PXE boot. The best way to see if that's actually what's happening is to actually open up the console through the BMC. Many of them will give you a remote console that you can see on the machine to see what it's actually doing. You have to actually just watch what's happening as it goes through. There are a couple periods in the OSD process. We call them, blackout periods, or we think of it as sending an astronaut around the moon, where we issue a command, and we don't have any way of knowing what went wrong until it talks back to us successfully. This is one of those blackout periods. When we do the PXE boot, if it never responds, we have no way of talking to the machine again other than telling it to reboot, because that's all we can do through the BMC. So at some point, you may need to go to the console and look at that PXE message. So when the machine actually PXE boots, what it's going to do is it's going to get a DHCP address from the WDS server and then talk to the WDS server to figure out, to try to download a boot image. Now, when that happens, on the WDS server, we have a provider that runs within WDS. And that provider does a number of things. First, it'll go and ask the VMM server, is this machine authorized to boot? How it determines if it's authorized is whenever you do a PXE boot, that machine sends an SMBIOS GUID. That's a unique identifier about the machine that tells it, how to find the machine, or that this is a unique ID. We will then compare that, what comes back from the PXE boot, to the SMBIOS GUID of the machine that you told it to deploy to when you first kicked off the job. That's one of the parameters of the new VM host job, is this SMBIOS GUID. So we match what's in the PXE boot with what we discovered. Now, you would expect them to be the same, and unfortunately, that's not always the case. I know at least one person in the audience is laughing because I worked with him to troubleshoot an issue like this. A great example of this is the HP Virtual Connect. If you're using a Virtual Connect system or some other one of these converged infrastructure devices, where you have a virtual set of IDs, those can interfere because what you discover through WDS in that case may be different from the virtual ID that the Virtual Connect device will send. So how do you figure out that this is what was going on? Well, the simplest way is to go to the VMM event viewer on the VMM server. So I think that if I open this up correctly, this right here is the event viewer on the VMM server. You see applications and services logs, and then under VM Manager, we record a number of events. This is essentially our audit trail of everything that goes on in the machine. You'll see an event here for the new VM host job getting kicked off. Basically, any job that you see get kicked off, I think pretty much has a message in here. When a machine PXE boots, VMM will log every record of a machine that came in through that WDS provider, whether it was one that we authorized or one that we didn't authorize. We log every one of them, and then that way you can basically compare what's in here with what you kicked off in the new VM host job. When the job fails, we actually do output the one that we were expecting on the job for the new VM host, and then you can go here and compare it to what you see in here. If you don't see any entry in here after you booted the machine, you see no entry at all, then the chances are it's something your WDS server is having a problem. If you actually go to the WDS server, you can actually see our provider and verify that it's installed correctly by doing this wdsutil/getserver/showconfig command. And this will output a bunch of information, but the key thing to look for is this right here, this VMM OSD provider. We generally want that to be first in the order, because one of the things that we do is if this provider finds an address that it doesn't match, it'll pass it on to the next provider in the order. If you have a provider that's first and it decides to eat that address for some reason, then our provider will never get it. So we want our provider to be first. If you don't see it here as first, your best bet is to actually just remove and re-add that WDS server. would probably be the easiest way to get it fixed. All right, so let's move on. Oh, it would help if I went on back to PowerPoint. Okay, so now WDS has authorized the machine to PXE boot. Oh, only other times we found that the SM BIOS GUID doesn't match is if there are occasionally times where you get basically defective hardware from the vendor. You may get SM BIOS GUID that returns all zeros for some reason. It's pretty rare. We have seen it on a few machines, and in those cases, you either have to kick off the new SCVM host manually from the commandlet and specify that corrupt value, or basically, if it's still in warranty, ship it out back to the vendor and get them to fix it. Sometimes that's fixed by a BIOS update. So, one of the first troubleshooting steps I would recommend is you update the BIOS to the latest version. That certainly never hurts. Well, maybe could hurt, but sometimes it doesn't hurt. Okay, so once it gets authorized, then we download we'll download a WinPE image that we already have out on the WDS server. This WinPE image gets put on the WDS server from the VMM server. We have a base WinPE image that if you go to the session tomorrow on Zero to Clustered Cloud, you'll learn how to customize that WinPE image. But when we deploy it, we put a certificate into that WinPE image to make sure that that machine that's booting really is the one that we're expecting. It can happen where, especially if you upgrade your VMM server without redeploying, or you uninstall the VM server and reinstall, but don't actually re-add the agent on that machine, the certificate won't be the one that it's expecting, and you'll get a failure at this point when you download the WinPE image, or actually right when it boots, you'll get an error. And when that happens, you basically just rerun the publish SC Windows PE command, and that'll basically push a new WinPE image out with a revised certificate. If for some reason you suspect that that certificate got compromised, you would also do the publish as well to basically issue a new certificate in the process. One thing that can occur during this download process, we have seen some environments where this download can take a really long time, and that's not normal. This download step should take about 45 seconds or less. If you see it taking longer than that, then you need to start to look into some of your TFTP server settings within WDS to try to tune it for your network. I've seen it. One example, it took 9 minutes by default. And there's a great article on TechNet. If you just search TechNet for TFTP tuning with WDS, you'll get a great article that tells you how to troubleshoot those problems. The reason why you need to make sure that this TFTP transfer or the download of WinPE image goes fast is because that first step of PXE booting till the time we get first contact back again, we only allow a 10-minute timeout there. And if some of you know how long it takes for new servers to boot these days, that can eat up half of that 10 minutes. And then if your download then takes another 5 minutes after that, you're going to hit that 10-minute timeout. So it's very important that you tune where you can. The other thing that affects the amount of time it takes to boot is how many of your network adapters are actually set up to PXE boot. Because each one of those adapters is going to do a 30-second timeout before it'll go on to the next adapter. And if it goes through a few of those before you actually get the one you want, then you've eaten it up another couple minutes there. All right, so once we've downloaded, we boot into WinPE, and the WinPE image has our agent in it, and the agent's going to talk back to the VMM server. Now, this step can fail. Primarily, this would fail due to DNS issues, are one common cause of failure. If the VMM server name doesn't resolve from the agent in WinPE, then it won't be able to talk back to the VMM server, and the job will fail because it didn't make first contact. Another common problem is you could have a proxy server in between. If you have a proxy in the way, you're also going to have a problem. If you get into WinPE and the job fails, we do have there is a log file that gets generated. When the error comes up in WinPE, it'll tell you where to find it. It gives you the instructions exactly on the screen how to find that log file. And And the log file, it is a text file. You can go through and try and see within the text file what may have caused that problem. The important thing, though, to note is as soon as that machine reboots, that text file is going to get deleted because we can't keep any state on the machine at this point. So it's important that you basically get that information off of there. Once you're in WinPE, assuming the network adapter is working, you can actually do like a net use to map a drive and copy that off. Or if you have physical access to the machine, you put a thumb drive in and copy the file off as well. So that log file, if an error in WinPE could occur at any point from here until the end. So check out what's on the console if you want to see if that's what has any useful information. All right, so we run GCEs. These are generic commands you can run within WinPE to do things like update firmware, configure RAID. These are basically commands you run. One thing that we do when a command fails, we actually will return the output, or actually any of the output from these GCE commands. We'll return those in the job so you can see what the output looked like. Next thing we do is download the VHD. It's been pretty rare that I've seen any sort of failure here. This just does a bits transfer from our library server into the bare metal server. And then we'll inject the drivers. I have seen a problem here before where if you get a bad driver, the job will fail. So again, if you go to the WinPE image itself on the console, there will be a DISM log there that you can find that will tell you if a driver caused a failure to happen. And so what you need to do is basically untag that driver or remove it from the library so it doesn't get deployed again. Or put the right driver in the library. And then finally, we reboot the machine into the machine for the first time so that we can customize and domain join. One common problem that can occur here, and I know Ani in the audience who's co-presenting tomorrow, I don't know if you're planning on talking about this, is that if you are using a dynamic VHD for the boot, that VHD is going to expand to its full size on the first boot. The problem is you need to have that much disk space available. And if your machine, your server has a lot of memory, let's say it has 128 gigs like the machines we're using here this week, it's going to create a page file of that size first. And that may not leave much room for your VHD. So it's important that, A, for production machines, you don't use dynamic VHDs. You use the convert option that we have that'll convert to fixed. Or you make sure you have enough disk space to hold that page file for all that memory that it's going to try to use. Last step, actually it's not the last step. After we domain join, it boots for the first time, and then we install our agent. Now there's one common issue that can happen here is that, yes?
Join the domain, right? How do you set up your network? So how are you setting up your networks? Let's say, for example, I have all trunk ports, right? So you're talking to the BMC, but if all my ports are trunked, how do you go about identifying and configuring the network configuration to get to?
Yeah, so as part of the add resource wizard, we will ask for a MAC address of the network adapter to use for the management adapter. We assume then that adapter has enough connectivity that we can get it up and running and talk to VMM through that one adapter. Once you then have the machine up, running, and booted, then you can configure the additional adapters after that. But we need just that one management adapter to get, to basically bootstrap it up to the point where we get our agent on there, and then you can run additional commands to configure the rest of the adapters. The other option is if you are using DHCP, we assume that whatever address gets the DHCP address is able to talk out and contact the VMM server. But one of the problems with DNS is that when this machine registers with DNS, the DNS server that your host is on may be a different DNS server from the one that your VMM server is talking to. And it can take a while for that new DNS entry to propagate through your environment. We've seen in some of our environments, some of our MSIT environments take, as they say, it could take as much as 24 to 48 hours for those DNS to propagate fully throughout the environment. When that happens, you basically have two options. One, you could pre-stage the DNS, 2 days in advance if that's how long it's going to take. Usually it doesn't take that long. Or you can just wait and then re-add the host manually when you know the DNS has registered. At the point that you get here and the machine's booted, even if the host agent fails, the machine is up and running and essentially fully configured. It's just a matter of getting our agent on it. You can then use the Add Resource Wizard to do that as you would with any other Hyper-V host. OK, so customized, domain joined. And then last step, we actually enable Hyper-V earlier to save a reboot, and that's it. It's done, and you're added to everything. So demo actually already showed you the demos I wanted to show along the way. So this is now my transition to hand it off to Alvin, who's going to talk about agent troubleshooting.
Thank you. Well, we covered agent because it's probably the top 3 of our situations that we have are call centers. And we get a lot of calls on agents, host not responding, that type of situation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the server-agent communication. And the VMM service really uses WinRM. By default, it uses HTTP port 5985. It uses WMI services and providers to be able to gather information, but all that information is always flowing through WSMan to the server, to the VMM server. So where do we start? The easy way is in VMN 2012, they now provided a property within the host to actually look at the status of the host and see if it's healthy or if something is failing. If it's in a fail state, you will see something similar to critical and if there is a remediation step to be taken. At that point, you can just repair all, and it will restart the services or perform an action. But we want to see the hardware, right? This is why we want to do troubleshooting. So we first start with do a WinRM config that will show the properties of a server. And this is the base configuration of a Windows 2008 server before the agent is installed. Once we install the agent, you'll see that there are specific parameters that change. I want to highlight 2. One of them is trusted host. And I had an experience where a customer had a group policy that was reverting that trusted host to no value. And we need the asterisk or a star in the value to be able to allow for connections to occur. And so lesson learned there is if you're going to use or apply group policies to manage your WinRM configurations, test them thoroughly. I mean, it could affect the communication. Second option that we are going to cover is the root SDDL. And basically, you can see a SID value that's highlighted. And what this SID does is actually give you remote access to the account that VMM is running under to perform these remote actions to talk to the agent. This SID will translate to the virtual machine manager server local group. And that group will contain that account. If it's running under system, it will be a computer account that will be listed in that. Otherwise, it will be a domain account. And that's the group highlighted there. And that's the value. In this case, we see that there's a computer. If it was a domain, it will have that entry there as well. So troubleshooting steps. Where do we start? Well, we recommend you go to the host and you run the WinRM ID. That will help you out. That's some sort of a ping. We run the WinRM command. It will show display values. We then perform the WinRM command, but this way we're going to use the remote switch and provide credentials, kind of simulating what the VMM service is trying to do. Then we'll check for listeners by enumerating the listeners. If listeners are available, you will see a list and the properties. Otherwise, nothing will show, indicating that there may be a problem. And it's very important after you perform these actions on the host to go to the VMM server and run the WinRM command ID to the remote agent. And the reason we recommend this is that we encountered several proxy issues, like Greg mentioned, that could interfere with communication. And if the proxy configurations are very strict, it won't allow the communication to go through, affecting the whole system. In that case, you're more or less going to see all your hosts being in an unknown state. So in a managed computer, if you run WinRM ID, you see a few lines, less words, and all happy. If it's bad, you'll see a lot of words, a lot of lines occurring. Working with the listeners, you can enable the HTTP listener. It's very important to have that enabled because that's our channel to communicate with the host. If you run the command, the listener, the WinRM enumerate, you will see that we'll show the transport, the port, and what are the IPs that we're listening on. There's another section that's going to be named compatibility, and that's basically for backward compatibility with VMM 2008 and earlier versions. So we left that there to be able to communicate with those agents. All right, so if everything is nice and dandy and that's in those sections, you may want to move on to the event logs. If something is going on with the WinRM service, service control will definitely show an information, and more than likely we have that documented somewhere, or there's a patch or a hotfix. If you don't find any information there, you may want to go to the event viewer. We have a section for Windows Remote Management. Once you open the operations log, there are several entries in there that may indicate why there's problems with WinRM. There's entries that will show tests that are being performed by the agent on itself. And there usually are HTTP error codes or result codes. If you still have problems with WinRM, then more than likely you're going to call the support aid. But before we go to that channel, it's good to be able to collect traces. And the operating system has ETL channels to collect WinRM tracing. They are disabled by default because we don't want to interfere with the performance of the box. So the actions to perform in PowerShell will be to import the modules, the PS diagnostics. That will provide you with the commands to do the tracing in WinRM. So then you enable WSMantrace and then reproduce the issue. The key here is that you want to maintain the tracing. When you enable tracing, you want to maintain it as close as to the error as possible. So this way the log is maintained, it's kind of lower in the lines that it's logging. So it's easier when you decode and it's smaller. And then disable the WSMantrace, and we'll output the result to that log in system32 wsmtraces.log. The only catch here is that we don't have any public available tool that will convert that trace. That trace is binary, and we don't have any tools publicly available that will convert these. So at this point, you may have to engage our support team to be able for us to decode that file and provide it to you. So next, after we test the WinRM communication, you want to basically test the communication between WinRM and the underlying components that we interact with, WMI service or WMI providers. So let's move on to those sections. So the first thing you want to do is basically test the communication between the WinRM and the base OS WMI class. And the command provided there will give you very basically the computer system, operating system version, all that sort of information. And if it fails, it most likely could be a cause of WMI corruption or access denied. Maybe the account doesn't have rights. If it happens to be a WMI corruption, you may want to leverage Windows management commands to verify the repository and maybe just repair the repository at that point. Same with all three, but so the next step, if everything's okay with the OS, you may query for the Hyper-V WMI providers. These are all steps that the agent does behind the scenes. So you will want to query for the virtualization key or class. And always perform these actions, these commands with the HTTP because it's going to be similar to what WinRM is doing and BMM. If everything's nice and dandy at that point, then we can invoke a get version on the VMM agent WMI provider to see if it returns a value that will match the agent that it's installed. And the results should be something similar to what you see on the screen. So final thoughts on the agent. With VMM 2012, if you were yesterday's on Stephen Barron's service template section, if not, go back to it. It's very, very interesting. The service templates, they will show up on host. So we recommend now that you don't remove or re-add host through the console. The reason for that is that we lose the service pointers. We don't lose the VMs, but the services will be lost. So the scale out, the update services won't apply. You won't be able to perform those actions. So we want to avoid the re-add of hosts through the console. To overcome that, you can do two things. On the cluster, if it's running on a cluster, move the services to another host, to one of the nodes, and then work with the agent, work with the software of the other agent at that point on that other node, and then bring it all back once it's up and running. If you don't have it on a host, on a cluster, you may just go to the host, uninstall the agent, reinstall the agent once again, and then do the reassociation on the console. And that won't affect the records in our VMM database. And that way your services are available, even though you basically reinstall the agent at that point. So Greg is going to go ahead and perform some actions on the console, demonstrate some of the commands that we show here. Greg?
Yep. So yeah, I mean, these should all succeed here, but I'm just going to do just the quick WinRM ID on a host. Actually, let me open up, go to a host. I'll do it actually from the WDS server. So basically any place that a VMM agent is running, that includes the, oh, thank you. You actually want to see it. That includes, you know, of course, a VM host, includes a library server, WDS server, even within a service, the guests actually have the VMM agent running on there as well. So all of these commands should actually work on any of those places where an agent is running, not just VM hosts. So if I do WinRM ID, see if it works. So we just got that back. Actually don't actually have the commands memorized. Well, you can see from there. I mean, it basically, you get this level of detail back. Yeah, the one key thing is make sure you do try the -R, I believe it was, HTTP. This machine is, get the machine name in as well. This is my Pixie server, DC01. DC01, oh, 01. And, oh, and I didn't do my,
I think you have to specify the port.
Oh, the port, oh yeah, thank you, 5989. What helpful I, there we go. 85. There we go, that's better. Okay, so that actually goes through now the HTTP channel. And it's important that by verifying this and by putting the port on, we actually did verify through the port, through the right network listener, that, that this WinRM ID, you know, actually will succeed. It's very important that you follow these steps because each one you do reveals a little bit more information. There was actually an example with MSIT internally. Of course, over the holidays when very few people are around, they had an issue come in where basically, you know, several hundred of their hosts that they were managing lost contact with the VMM server, which of course makes it difficult to manage those hosts. It turns out that somebody on the VMM server had opened up their browser, set the proxy in the browser so they could actually get outside to the internet. And through following these WinRM troubleshooting steps, they were able to determine that it was the communication between the VMM server and the host, not the hosts themselves that were having the problem. So that basically ruled out a lot of the group policy possibilities. And once they're able to narrow that down, then they found the proxy problem and were able to fix it. So doing it in the right order makes a difference because it reveals a little bit more about what the problem is each time. All right, with that.
You probably won't. You probably would detect that using the FQDN on the command. If you use just a NetBIOS name, you probably won't hit that issue with the proxy.
All right, so if you just do this, you may not, because in this case it works, but you may not hit that.
Exactly.
Okay? All right, so we've talked about the agent, how to troubleshoot the agent. Let's move on to networking. I'll start by kind of just giving a general overview of how networking in VMM works. There are a number of areas that we've expanded on networking in VMM 2012. We've introduced this concept of a logical network, and it's basically a logical representation of what your network resources are. Generally when people talk about what they need to access with their VMs or their workloads, they don't say, I need to access subnet 192.168.1.0 VLAN 6. They say they want to access internet, or they want to access corp, or the back end. They don't really care what the actual networking configuration underneath those are. They just want to know what their connectivity is. And that's basically what logical networks are. They're the definition of a set of connectivity. The assumption is that any subnet VLAN combination that's within this logical network, that you've put within this logical network, they all have connectivity to each other. So that's basically a prerequisite that we have for a logical network. And that way, when we pick a subnet VLAN to use for a VM, we'll know that a subnet VLAN in one host group that's on this logical network that gets a subnet VLAN in a different host group, those will be able to talk to each other. In order for that to actually happen, there has to be a lot of coordination between the VMM server admin, the fabric admin, and the network admin, who is generally the person that sets up these VLANs in the environment. And that's actually is one of the pain points of VMM 2012 today, is the fact that the fabric admin does have to enter that information in manually and get it right. I'll show you in a little bit how you can run some scripts to help with the communication between the two sites. If you're really, if you really want to, you could probably script some of that and do some of that transfer yourself. But it's generally a one-time setup or infrequent setup. The next thing that we've added is this concept of static IP address pools. These IP address pools basically give us a way to allocate IP addresses to VMs. So we let you define pools. They get associated with logical networks and the subnet VLANs, so that depending on where the VM gets placed, it'll get the right address. Because we already have the knowledge of what subnet VLANs exist within the logical network. We know how those subnet VLANs are associated with the host group. So when you place a VM into a host group, a host on a host group connected to a certain logical network, we'll be able to pull an IP address that works within that network. We also have MAC address pools as well that we also pull from. And finally, last part I want to talk about on this overview here is load balancer support. We do have support for load balancer devices, in particular for services. When used within a service and you want to scale out a tier of that service, you want to make sure that you can still access that service, the application of that service, through a single IP address. And that's the purpose of the load balancer. Now, in order for us to talk to that load balancer, we require a provider from the load balancer vendor to get installed and to basically handle the communication between VMM and the actual load balancer device. I'm going to show you in a minute how you can verify that the provider is loaded and is able to talk to the device. Let me just keep going in a little more detail, though. I talked about the logical abstractions that you get with the logical network. Again, you have the classes of the connectivity of the network is what they represent. And I mentioned how different host groups can have different settings. Your production environment, which is in one building, and your test environment that's in a different building, may have different subnets. In fact, they likely will. And so we have this concept underneath the logical network called a logical network definition. You'll actually see it in our UI called a network site, since that's kind of a more descriptive term of what it actually is. And basically, you associate a network site with a host group, so that's how we make sure that your subnet VLAN in one environment that is in the internet logical network means the same thing as a different subnet VLAN in the other environment. And so then in your VMs now, you simply select a logical network and not the specifics of where it's going to deploy. And so that way your templates get reused regardless of which host group the VM actually eventually lands in. So in order for us to link the logical network to a host, even within a host group, on each physical adapter, you actually have to go in and set which logical networks that host adapter is also connected to. Now, we'll do some discovery automatically. In fact, there's an option in settings where you can go in and turn off the discovery if you don't want to use it, if it's returning the wrong data. But we'll generally discover the initial logical network automatically. And then, but any additional logical networks that are not discoverable, you'll need to add. And you won't be able to place a VM onto that host until the logical network that it needs is there. So you'll often get placement errors saying that there isn't an IP pool available to serve that VM. Well, that could be because the logical network wasn't actually set on that physical adapter of the host. And the reason why I have to do it on each physical adapter is because you may have one adapter that's connected to the internet, another one that's only connected to your back-end environment. And so you need to make sure that each one of those adapters is marked correctly with the logical network. And now IP pools, once you have subnet VLANs defined, then it's very easy to add an IP pool onto that. And those basically just need to map to the subnet VLANs. The IP pools also contain the gateway to use for that subnet VLAN, contains DNS servers, basically all your standard IP configuration settings. We will use that when we deploy a VM and do the customization step. We will basically populate the customization using information from the IP pool when you use static IPs. We don't interface with DHCP servers, so if you have a DHCP in your environment, then you don't need IP pools. In fact, you don't generally need much of our logical networks because you get your IP addresses from DHCP. But we found that a lot of customers generally don't use DHCP in their data centers. Okay. So let me jump in and show you how you can do generate some reports and do some troubleshooting with your network admin in the VM admin console. So I'm going to actually switch to a different server. Oh, and I will also switch over on the screen. You can see it. Okay, so let's see. Is this the? Oh, actually. So first thing I'm going to do is, I mentioned earlier that the network admin and the fabric admin, they need to talk to exchange this information. We know it's a pain point, something we're looking to address in the future. But for now, they have to talk. And the best way for them to exchange information is by basically running scripts to do output some useful information. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to basically get the network adapters on a particular host and output the type of information that a network admin might need to troubleshoot a problem. So first command I ran was get a CVM host network adapter and filtered by a specific host. In this case, it was hvdel.dcmanager.lab. Now I'm going to output some information about that adapter. So this is now a list of every physical adapter on that host. The BDF location is some information we refresh in from our agent to basically tell us uniquely where in that machine the network adapter is located. If you have adapters if you have hardware from similar vendors across the board, or the exact same hardware from the same vendor, you would expect that this information would be the same across the board. So that helps to uniquely identify like a slot in the machine. The next thing a network admin might want to know is the physical address, the MAC address of the adapters in the host. You can now give them that information if your host is having connectivity issues and figure out where that problem lies. Next thing I'm going to do is actually output now how VMM has what it expects for the configuration of that adapter. So still using the same adapters object that I got, I'm just going to report some different information this time. First, for each MAC address, I'm going to output if we expect it to be in access or trunk mode, because that will affect how the VLAN tagging occurs, which is something that the network admin will need to set up. Whether or not it has VLANs enabled, which logical networks those adapters are connected to, and then finally the subnet VLANs we're expecting on that adapter. So this is some useful information that the fabric admin can hand to the network admin and say, here's what we're expecting. Is this what you're giving me? Or vice versa, and the network admin can give you information and you can verify that it matches what you see here. All right, so let's move on to IP address pools. I mentioned that we do allocate addresses from a pool for a VM, but what if you want to find out which address is in use or where it's been assigned? Generally, this is a hands-off thing. You don't need to be involved, but sometimes you do need to track down that address. We don't actually show in our UI a list of every address in a pool. There's too many addresses, especially if you're using IPv6. The performance, would have a huge performance impact in our UI. If you do need to get to that level of detail, you can go do it through scripting when you really need to get it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a static IP address pool that I have here called VM traffic. Whoop. And so here I'm just outputting some information about that address pool. Much of this information here is available in our UI. It says what the range is for the address pool, how many addresses are available, which ones can be used for, how many can be used for with the load balancer, a variety of bits of information, which logical network definition this address pool is on, that sort of thing. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a specific IP address out of the pool. Or actually, I'm going to get all of the addresses. This pool isn't very big, so I believe by default when you do this, it's going to return the addresses that are currently in use. So it's going to return one entry for each address that's in use. So here, this is the .1 address. It's currently assigned to a virtual network adapter. And it's on this VM right here, this SCIM400T1. If you go look at the different types, you can see that some are actually assigned to a VM. And I know that some of you wonder, when you look at the VMs view in VMM, you see that in some cases we show an IP address on a virtual network adapter, and sometimes we don't. With Windows Server 2008 R2, so we know when we created the VM and customized it, we know which adapter we put that IP address on, so we can show it next to the adapter. Windows Server 2008 R2, through the guest tools, won't tell us that information. We only know, we can query which addresses it has, but it doesn't tell us where that address is. So in that case, if we refresh in a VM that we didn't create, we'll still record that that address is in use automatically. So you import a VM that somebody else created and has a static IP address assigned that matches something in our pool. We'll refresh it in, and we'll mark it as in use, but we'll assign it to the VM rather than the virtual network adapter. In this case here, you can see this one's assigned to a VM. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to manually check out an address. If you actually want to reserve one specifically for a purpose, we're going to do that. And you do that through the grant SCIP address commandlet. Basically what we're saying is this address that let's see here, we're basically just saying check out any address from the IP pool and give it to this virtual machine. So there, we just checked out the number 12 address and gave it to that virtual machine. Now I can go in the address. So that you would do this if, let's say you created your VM after the fact, decided, oh, I need to actually add a network adapter to it. So you add the adapter, and now you want to pull an address out of the pool. Well, this is how you would do that. Here we're seeing a count of how many available addresses there are. OK, this example is now going to show you what happens if you try to check out an address and the pool is full. This could happen as part of your normal operation. So this pool I have called heavy usage. I'm basically going to try to pull out an address from here. And we're going to see we got an error saying all the addresses have been used. Well, we can't grant one from it because it's already in use, so let's ignore that. And you can see, if we check how many addresses, we see there are 0 addresses. Now we're going to actually list the addresses again. So what we're doing now is just formatting and figuring out where the addresses are assigned, which VMs they're assigned to. This is the last part of this script that I'm going through. And basically what we're doing is this little script here, if I scroll to the right, basically says for each VM address, we're basically going to get the VM and return the name of that VM that it's assigned to. And let's just make sure we can see all of it. Yeah, group by assigned to type. So we're going to get it and we're going to group it. see if this actually does what I did. Oh, this actually doesn't return. I think that the VMs that were actually in this pool got deleted today, so you'll have to take my word for it that this script actually does work. But this is some useful information. So basically all it's doing is taking what was in the address pool, what we queried, and translating the IDs for each one into the actual object that it is linked to. The key thing to note, though, is that you have to do it a little different for each type that it's assigned to. So if it's assigned to a virtual machine, then you have to get the virtual machine. If it's assigned to a virtual network adapter, you have to get the virtual network adapter. And you'll basically just need to filter the addresses that you got back to do that. OK, one last thing I want to show you before we open it up to more questions or before you head off to the closing party, whichever you prefer. I just want to show you the load balancer integration. Let's see. Oh, I'll show you how to test the load balancer that the provider is working correctly. The first place to look whenever you have a provider issue would be in settings to make sure, and you go down to configuration providers. This right here will show you where. Oh, I am on the wrong. Hold on, I'm on the wrong server. It'll show you which providers you have installed. So if you have, let's say, an F5 load balancer, you would go there and you would see your providers there. Is this the one I want? I'm going to actually switch over to my other environment here. We actually have an F5 load balancer installed. You look at your configuration providers, and you'll see that you have the provider. You'll see a check mark to say that it was loaded correctly. This is the first place you'll look if you installed a provider and you don't see it listed in the available providers when you add your load balancer. It's common to have some issues here that could prop up after you've installed that provider. The next thing to do, specifically for load balancers, is you go to our Fabric view, and in the location where you added the load balancer under Networking and Load Balancers, you can see that for each load balancer that's installed, here we have the F5 Networks Big IP, and you go to Properties, and go to Provider, we have this really handy test view where we basically select the provider, which one we want to test, and you hit Test. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the provider and exercise a number of the functions in that provider, basically to verify that it works, that we're talking to that load balancer. You can use it to basically troubleshoot if you have credential issues, if you can't actually talk to the load balancer. It's a good place to start if you are having load balancer issues that you need to troubleshoot. All right, and with that, I think we're just about right on time with some time left for questions. We have about 15 minutes if you want to ask questions. Go through if you've had any problems you want to share with us that you want to talk about. We'll be more than happy to listen to them. And if you're not done, then thank you. Thank you for coming today. One last thing I want to show, though, before you're all gone. Just recap what we covered. Some more, some of the sessions you might want to go to. There's really only one left tomorrow that's still live, which is the Zero to Cluster to Cloud. If you really want to know more about bare metal provisioning, I strongly recommend you go to this session. The rest we included in here mainly so you can go back and watch the recorded version. Again, it's just a variety of useful and informative sessions. And then please complete your session evaluations. With that, we've got about 15 minutes for questions. Be happy to take any that you might have. If you're all questioned out, please enjoy the party.
So I've run into a couple issues with the RC and RTM revoking the IP address from the pool. It doesn't actually come back ever. Is there a specific time that it actually pulls for that address if it still exists or not?
So you're saying that the address is not marked as in use? Or
so the address is marked in use.
Marked in use, but the VM that uses it is gone?
Correct. And it doesn't get revoked. I don't know if there's a timer or a watcher service.
If the VM was deleted out of band from VMM, I believe we don't pull the address. We don't mark the address as available again, because we don't know if that VM could come back. Let's say you used a Hyper-V Manager to export it. That VM may still exist and may come back online at some point. The only time we will really mark it as available again is if we actually deleted it and we know that it's gone.
You know, both situations, I actually delete the VM out of VMM itself.
Yeah, if you deleted it from VMM, yeah, I could definitely see that happening with the RC. I guess
RTM as well, though.
It's possible it could still happen with the RTM. We definitely, would be a bug, possibly a bug we could look into. If you do find that it occurs, you'll probably want to use some of the commands I just showed you to actually get what's assigned and then manually return it back to an available
That's
state.
what I had to do, is do the SC revoke command.
Exactly. You can do the revoke and pull it back out yourself. There's also in our UI, let me just show you real quick. We actually did, I believe it was after our beta, let me switch back to my other server.
Is that the interface that shows the release?
Yeah, we added in a view into the IP pool properties. So if I actually go to the logical networks and show you the properties of the pool. Oh, thank you. We actually go to the properties of that pool. We actually have an inactive addresses section. And this will occur if we do, if you do delete a VM out of band from us, we'll mark it as inactive, and you can actually go in here and manually reset it. Now, if we still think it is active for some reason, then we won't put it here. Well, you still won't see it, and you'll have to use the command list to actually go in and manually revoke the assignment. Any other questions? Yes.
Over the years, we've seen some issues with the database getting out of sync with the actual true information.
The database getting out of sync with what?
With the true information about where a virtual machine is living, what its status is. It could be due to blue screen. It could be due to people rebooting the wrong hosts while you're live migrating from Virtual Machine Manager. There's all kinds of scenarios, people doing things in cluster management or in Hyper-V Manager instead of in Virtual Machine Manager. Mm-hmm. What we've also seen is renaming the NICs doesn't always get updated in the database, and it keeps working with older nicknames, all that sort of issues that seem like a problem. And people start troubleshooting them, actually creating more issues than there are. Mm-hmm. Do you have any better health checks and cross checks about what's being stored in the database versus what's happening in reality to prevent such situations in the new version?
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on?
When we encounter those type of issues, there are some PowerShell command lists that you can remove the VM out of band. I mean, from the VMM console. There's a switch called for the remove SCV virtual machine /force that will remove the VM out of the VM console, but not on the host, and that will allow you to reset and do
those
then
often
do a
don't work,
refresh.
and either we have the time to take the host out of management in Virtual Machine Manager, or we just add it to the database, which is not always the most supported way of dealing with this. But that's the minor issue we've seen with Virtual Machine Manager.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you run into things like that, I know we've done work over the years to kind of try and clean up these, when we do get lost or do lose track of objects like that. We haven't been doing our best to try and fix those. So I think those are certainly cases where you should report that through Connect so that we can track down and figure out if maybe you're in a situation that we haven't considered, and then we can try and address it in the product.
Yeah, I want to second his comment. We've seen this many times. We've had to remove the entire cluster from VMM. I think it is a requirement, basically, since you're not the source of truth. Mm-hmm. Hyper-V and Failover Cluster Manager are the source of truth. That there be some big red button with lots of warnings saying regenerate all your knowledge from the cluster. Mm-hmm. It's one of the biggest challenge of any of these management tools is you think you're truth and you're not. Mm-hmm. Right? It happens today. We have an entire cluster where now we have every virtual machine on RTM that says unsupported cluster configuration. Mm-hmm. Every VM is working perfectly. Failover Cluster Manager works perfectly, but there's some weird configuration that somehow VMM thinks is wrong, and now I can't remote into my machines, I can't move my machines, I can't do anything with them in VMM. You're not truth, mm-hmm. and you need to have some way for us to say you're out of sync with truth, mm-hmm. and reset yourself. It's a major issue with VMM.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it makes for very, very interesting and very popular blog posts. I admit that. I benefit from that in some way. But
Yeah, no, I say
it's
definitely,
always pretty.
definitely log the feedback and connect. Are you seeing this with 2008 R2 primarily, or with 2012?
We've
both?
seen this with 2008 R2. We've seen this with 2012. We're
Okay.
on 2012 RTM right now, and we have this problem where my entire cluster, every virtual machine now says unsupported cluster config because of something somewhere that we don't know about, one of these new network configuration fabric things that we don't understand exactly yet, so we haven't been able to figure it out. But failover cluster manager works perfectly. I can live migrate.
And if you
anything I
right
want.
click on the VM and go to repair, will it tell you what the?
If you're in such a state, repair option is not even there. It's
Yeah.
It's different.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that works for the invalid VM configuration, but if.
Because now you say don't remove it anymore.
Okay.
Because you leave the services, so we're further away from what we need.
Okay. Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, you're saying that you can't delete the cluster anymore because the services will
Exactly.
get lost,
So
the service
if-
information.
If you say remove the agent, then reinstall the agent, there was no problem with there was no problem
Right.
with the host. So now you say, and then the database is unaffected. We need to affect the database. We need to tell the database what's going on.
Yeah, no, I definitely
totally
understand
agree.
the situation. Please log it and connect so that we get the feedback that this is a major issue.
I think this has been mentioned last.
Yeah,
I don't know,
this
last
has been
time.
blog and connect. This has been blogged about
This has-
since 2008 original.
We've
Mm-hmm.
done
And
that.
there seems to be no understanding from the product group that VMM is not truth.
Right.
The OS, Hyper-V, and failover cluster manager are truth. And there are scenarios. We had one where somebody screwed up the network switch. We lost SAN for like an hour, right? All the virtual machines went nuts on the base OSs. We brought it back up, and VMM was just garbage. And we had to take the whole cluster out of VMM, right? Now we're partially flying blind. We're not providing service to our users who are relying upon it, simply because there was no button that said, hey, VMM, we did something bad in the infrastructure. Mistakes happen. We're human, right? You need to go figure out what truth looks like again.
Okay.
You have the benefit in Windows Server 2012 now that things you shouldn't do in Server Manager if your Hyper-V machines are running in a cluster,
Right.
and it will actually disallow you of doing that. So it forces you to take the right way. But to prevent all these issues from, his was not a user mistake, but they also happened by user mistake. VMM should almost force people not to be able to use the cluster GUI or the Hyper-V Manager GUI if you are managing everything through Virtual Machine Manager.
Okay.
On the other hand, the only thing that saves us at the moment is having the other tools or editing the database. So I'm not advocating that you would block our access to the tools if we're running VMM, because then we would be totally toast except for editing the database. So it's very bad if it happens because it's misleading. Often it's only a cosmetic issue, and often it's like in his scenario, it's a disaster because you're actually, like, as he said, flying blind. Work on it.
Yes, we will. So thanks for the feedback. Yeah, we'll definitely
May I
take
ask
that
you a
back.
question around what happens, apart from what you said before, what happens if you remove a host from the cluster in Virtual Machine Manager, and then, or the whole cluster, and you put it back? What do you lose? What do we lose?
You will lose the knowledge of the connection. You'll lose the connection of that VM to the service, so it would appear as a standalone VM and not attached to the service. So you wouldn't be able to do scale out. You wouldn't be able to do servicing of that service.
That's new in 2012. It wasn't in 2008.
Right, right. Your regular VMs would operate normally. It's only services that would be impacted by this, but it's definitely the direction we're going. So it's a problem we know about, and it's something that I hope we get to fixing in the near future. Personally.
He did not destroy this cluster.
Yeah,
no, just removed it from. Yeah, but it's often wrong data in the database that's causing it. Everything is working fine. Everything is happy and running and functioning as long as you don't try to approach it using system center.
So, switching topics slightly.
Yep.
Is there a plan for integration with IPAM from Windows 8? Because we're a Windows 8 TAP customer. We're all using IPAM. We only allocate IP addresses through IPAM, and I don't want it to be in Virtual Machine Manager because I use IPAM across everything in my data center, not just Virtual Machine Manager. So is there a plan to integrate with IPAM when you get to Windows 8?
There are plans to do reporting of the address utilization from VMM server into IPAM through scripts that you can set up to periodically run, but we are not moving the VMM's set of IP address pools out into IPAM, to have it be the source of them in the next release. So
Big frowny face.
I know, I just saw that.
Remember my single source of truth statement?
Yes.
We want IPAM to be our single source of truth, not have some stuff in VMM and some stuff in IPAM. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's a feature.
Yeah, I mean, you will have the addresses reported in IPAM, so you'll see them all there, but VMM will be you won't have the single source of truth. VMM will be the source of truth for its addresses, and DHCP will be the source for.
It'll think it is.
No, in this case it will be, as long as you don't, assuming you don't, use the same pools elsewhere, it will be the source of truth.
Right. If I have a VLAN for
Yes.
security that said this is where all SQL goes, I've got a bunch of virtual SQL, but I've got this one physical SQL, right? That IPAM, I can tell it about everything.
Right.
VMM, I can't tell it about my physical server.
Yeah, so you need to carve out a portion of that pool and give it to VMM for exclusive use. You can exclude some addresses from that pool if you know they're already in use by a physical server, and then we'll report back. So you will still be able to look in one central place. Yeah, but that's good feedback.
Last question. We found the Fabric logical networks piece really confusing because it's so new and it's so different from anything we ever did in R2. Do you have a good reference for us to go read the, how to understand Network Fabric for Dummies in 2012? Because we believe that we're probably causing ourselves problems. We've actually taken our hosts offline by making a mistake in the fabric and switching a VLAN when we shouldn't have actually done it there, and our host just disappears from our network and we have to go in with DRAC.
Yeah,
so
I don't
really
have
need some guidance so that we don't screw this up.
I don't have a good source off the top of my head, but definitely would make a good blog post for me to collect that and post it on our VMM blog.
May I be so bold as to answer this?
Pardon me?
May I try to answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was at the table, and there was a guy that says, have you looked at TechNet? We updated all the documentation, but we needed to hold the switch until Monday. And he said, give me your USB stick. I'll put the documentation on it. We were too late to put it on the USB stick. So there's good documentation now, since Monday. They had it on before, but they weren't allowed to show it. So that's the guy who...
Are UX being published?
I don't know the quality, but...
Yeah, drill down during the network settings because there's more information, more links regarding logical networks and the explanation of those.
All right, and with that, we're out of time. So thank you all for coming and asking questions, and your feedback is noted. So thank you.